There we go. All right, then. So, Lois, we are live in three, in two, and one. Welcome or welcome back, everyone, to Aaron's Opinion podcast for blind people, where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. We have been waiting and very patiently waiting for quite a while to sit down with Lois Strachan. You are just fascinating. I don't really recall exactly where or how you came across Aaron's Opinion or how we found each other, but we're glad we did. So, of course, I know you do a lot of things for podcasting. I know you do a lot for people. I know you've written a lot of books. I know you've done a lot of stuff. And you've also had a spiritual journey along the way. You can tell everything you want to tell me, or you do not need to tell anything you do not want to tell me. But you know the question that I ask everyone that'll kick it off today. Who is Lois Strachan? Go.
I always think that that's one of the hardest questions. It seems like such a really simple question because we all should know who we are, but there's so many different facets to each person's life. Now, where do you start? What do you say? What do you not say? I guess the simplest thing for me to say is, as you said, I'm Lois. I I do a number of things, but primarily I am a disability coach, and I use all of my different platforms to demystify disability and to help build inclusion of people with disabilities into society and the workplace. So just to unpack that a little bit, I am a coach, I'm a podcaster, I'm a writer, I am a musician, I am a speaker, a blogger. I do pretty much anything that I can to help me spread the message that we're just normal people who use different tools and techniques. And I love the work I do. I love the fact that it uses some of my real strengths, which is my problem solving, my puzzle solving strength, my curiosity, my inherent belief that we have more abilities than people give us credit for. And that ability to have a voice, to raise my voice, use my voice as a way of advocating for people who maybe don't always feel as comfortable speaking out. So I love helping people to share their stories. I love sharing my own story. And yeah, I really just love being the person I am in the world that I'm in. And I think I am very privileged to have the opportunities that I do to do the work that I do.
You're very right, and you're very wise. You said two things that, of course, you know that I want to unfold. You said that you're a problem solver. Excuse me. And you said that you also love to solve puzzles. You also mentioned demystifying disability, which is a
Mhm.
very interesting topic. So you know what I'm going to ask. So what puzzles have you used to demystify disability? And by the way, what are the puzzles of mysticism behind disability that you have tried to demystify each day?
You're asking some really big questions, Erin. And I think in order for me to answer this, even a bit at a time, I want to take it back actually to a little bit of my story behind losing my sight. Um, I am totally blind and I lost my sight at the age of 21 as a result of type 1 diabetes. I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 6 years old. And what I don't know if I knew that the implications of not managing my diabetes might be as serious as they became. But even as a sighted child, I've always loved puzzles, picture puzzles, word search puzzles, anything that would help me use that ability to look at a problem, find a solution, find a way forward. And that didn't change when I lost my sight. And for me, in my personal life, it became my blindness, adapting to my blindness, figuring out what I could and sometimes couldn't yet do was all just one big, glorious puzzle for me to kind of solve. And that's part of the journey that I've taken in my own life and continue to take because we know life keeps changing. Our technology keeps changing. Our possibilities keep changing. And it's also very much a process, a strength that I use to work with other people with disabilities to help them unpack some of the challenges that they face, some of the obstacles and problems that they face in their lives, both in their personal lives and in their business lives. So that problem solving, that puzzle solving thing, it's it's something I have been using quite strategically in the work I do. And it both feeds a love of my own. It uses strength that I have, which I think is something that as human beings, we should really be tapping into the strengths that we have and seeing how we can use those, seeing how we can use them to build our lives around the strengths that we have rather than the weaknesses that we think we have. So it's all very fundamental to what I do and how I do it. The demystifying of disability, I think, is, as you say, it's a big term. And I think I've never thought about it in the sense of the mythical side of living with a disability, because we know, as people who have disabilities, we know that it's a very concrete, real experience for us. And I think some of the mystification, the confusion that affects us out in the eyes of the rest of society is the lack of understanding, the lack of knowledge of how we do the things we do, the tools that we use. And that's an ongoing conversation as well. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face because people don't know what we can do. They assume that something's going to be hard for us or difficult for us. So they assume we can't do it. And that's what feeds into this whole social stereotype that disability means lack of ability, lack of potential, lack of power. And yeah, it's such a big one to try and unpack in society. But that's also an opportunity because it does mean that there's scope for each of us as individual people living with disabilities to change the world around us in a small way, in a big way. It doesn't matter. Every time we go out and we do things and are seen to be being capable, seen to be doing the things that we are doing to live our lives, that helps to shift people's opinions. And that's quite an amazing thing to have the power to do that.
It absolutely is, Lois. And you also touched on the fact that your work, a lot of what you do is disability coaching. So I mean, we've heard in the States, and I believe you're from South Africa, but on my side of the pond, we've heard of life coaches. But what is disability? What do you think disability coaching really is? And what actually do you do when you work as a disability coach? What does that entail?
Well, disability coaching is really it's life skills coaching, it's business coaching, it's using my knowledge and understanding, the techniques that I learned in my qualifications as a coach to help be a thinking partner that walks alongside someone to help them unpack and think through the options they have when trying to solve a problem. And the reason that I chose to focus on disability coaching, it's essentially for me, it's actually just providing life skills and business coaching to people living with disabilities. And one of the main reasons that I chose to focus in this area is that often, from what I'm hearing from my clients, it's they could work with a coach who doesn't have a disability themselves, but the reassurance of having a coach who understands disability, who understands the environment, the context, the realities that we face as a community really helps to shortcut the conversations that they're having. So rather than having to explain the nuances of the world in which we live, that's already taken into consideration. That's kind of that the basic understanding is there, which often may not be if working with a non-disabled coach. And there are very few of us out there in the world with disabilities who are working in the coaching field.
Hmm.
And that's, I think it's an area for growth and potential that is so exciting to face.
Yeah, I am surprised, as you say, that so few people with disabilities work in the coaching field. I'm surprised by it, Lois, because in the States, many people with disabilities are actually attracted to social work.
Mm.
In many cases, a lot of people with disabilities say that they want to be a social worker or at least take the classes in university. So then why have you found that so few people with disabilities work as disability coaches?
I don't really have an answer for that. I think a lot of it is maybe a bit of confusion about what coaching really is,
Mhm.
the training and the skills that need to go into it, and what the coach is meant to achieve. I think there's a confusion in the interpretation of the word coach because generally, if you think of a coach in terms of, say, a sport or a team environment, a coach is someone of knowledge who gives instruction on how to better achieve the aims. Where a coach, as a business coach or a life skills coach, is more of a person who gives you an opportunity to think through the problems that you're facing. There's a fundamental belief in coaching that we actually do know more than we think we do ourselves. And the goal, I think, as for me as a coach, is to help my clients confront some of the challenges that they choose to give them the space to think through those challenges and to arrive at a solution that works for them and takes them forwards. So for me, it's about empowering people to move forwards in their own lives with the knowledge and skills that they have or that they identify that they need in order to help find a solution. And that can be small things, it can be big things. In some cases, there's a degree of mentoring that comes into it as well. So I can offer a suggestion to my clients and say, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about trying that? And it's then up to them to pick up an idea and run with it or not. And I don't really have a preferred outcome. It's not up to what I think will work best for my clients. It's up to what they think will work best for them and what they are likely to pick up and run with to help them in their lives. So I think that that balance between thinking, expecting that coaching is something that you need to be an expert in a specific topic in order to walk alongside someone who's thinking through a problem, or the idea that a coach is someone who's listening, identifying and asking the questions that help someone to figure out what their options are, and then to find the best way forward for them. And I think that's maybe where the confusion comes in, is this concept that coaching is something different from what it actually is. Because I don't need to be an expert on everybody's lives, their realities. What I need to do is to allow them to be the expert in their own lives. And that's the joy of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's really good. That's really good. So when when you work with these people in South Africa who are, looking for a job and really need coaching, exactly what really is the problem? Is there any one particular problem? In other words, is it just a lack of knowledge from employers? I mean, what is truly fundamentally holding people back in South Africa who have disabilities, who are wanting to obtain employment? What is exactly holding them back, if there's anything that is?
Oh my. Another one of those really big questions, because there's no single answer to that, I don't think. And first of
Right.
all, just to say, I do this on an international, on a global basis. So
Hmm.
I'm working with coaches in other countries as well.
Excellent.
And that's one of the fun things that I do get to do as well, is it gives me more exposure to the lived experiences of people with disabilities across the globe, and to understand that a lot of the barriers that we face are very similar, whether you are a person with a disability living in South Africa, in the UK, in the USA, it doesn't matter, because we face a lot of the same general social stereotypes of disability that stop us moving forwards, be that employment, be that in our lives generally. Those social stereotypes of disability are so strongly entrenched, and they've been there for so many hundreds of years, that they are pretty global as well. And it's really fascinating for me. And I find that as I learn more from the clients with whom I'm working, it does feed into the rest of the work that I'm doing as well. So, I mean, there's definite benefits in terms of that. If I look specifically at South Africa, I think we have, as I know you've had a number of other South African guests on your show, and we're working in an environment here where, if you look at the USA, you are looking at about a 70% unemployment rate for persons with disabilities. In South Africa, we're looking more at about a 98% unemployment rate, which of course poses all sorts of problems. We also, and I know you've also addressed this one on your podcast, you've spoken to people about the horror that was apartheid. And we're going to see the consequences of the lack of democracy in South Africa, and how that has rolled out into all aspects of society, including education, employment. There's just so many longer term consequences that we are still battling with. So, working with clients in South Africa, I find that often the questions that we're considering, that I'm working with my clients on, are some fairly fundamental self-belief issues. It's the ability to advocate, particularly in communities who are less exposed to open discussion about disability. It's perhaps less about employment concerns. Those I'm finding I am working more generally with clients overseas to help navigate conversations in a work environment. Or again, it can still be some of those self perceptions, self awareness, the ability to advocate. All of these they're very similar trends. But I think, yeah, I really think that we are, as a global community, we face a lot of the same challenges. And that's what I'm generally seeing in the coaching that I'm doing.
Sure, sure, absolutely. That definitely makes sense. You also are a podcaster and you have a beautiful way of speaking and a beautiful podcast voice. By the way, you have a perfect personality for that. So what really lit the fire under your ass to get into podcasting in the first place? It really takes, it takes a lot to really get into it because obviously most people don't have the courage to start a podcast and
Mhm.
don't have the courage to speak up around the world. So what encouraged you to get into podcasting in the first place?
I think the first introduction, I got introduced to podcasts quite late. In fact, I was on guide dog training with my last guide dog, and that was the first time I had listened to a podcast. One of the guys on training with me said, "You've got to listen to this podcast," while we were grooming our dogs. So, and I fell in love with the idea of audio and the power of audio to reach people, to allow people, to give people an opportunity to share their stories, to share their experiences. But I never really thought about doing very much about it. And then through a complicated, long story, I was invited to guest on a podcast, the Blind Abilities podcast with Jeff Thompson.
Absolutely.
And he and I chatted. It was a great conversation. And afterwards, he said to me, "Have you ever thought about podcasting?" And I said, "Oh, it would be great, but I don't know how to go about doing it." And he helped mentor me through starting the podcast. And even then, it gets a little more complicated because I was like, well, that's all well and good. I've now got some of the knowledge that I need, but where do I go next? And I just never got around to it. And then I met a woman named Deirdre Gower, who runs an organization called Accessible South Africa. And she happened to mention in passing over a cup of coffee that she wanted to start a podcast for her organization. And I jumped in and said, "I'll do that." And that was how we started. Originally, the podcast was the Accessible South Africa podcast, and we were focusing on accessible travel for people with disabilities. And that started about 5.5 years ago now. From there, I started bringing the name of the podcast into my brand, which is, well, I essentially the brand of A Different Way of Seeing, which is the title of my book and my Facebook page and all sorts of things like that. So it became A Different Way of Traveling. And then towards the end of COVID, I noticed that I was wanting to take the podcast in a slightly different direction, to bring it more generally into the world of disability. And it moved from A Different Way of Traveling into A Different Way of Seeing, a podcast where we talk all things disability. And I work with guests with any disability, across the spectrum of disabilities, talking about their lived experiences and different things like that. And I'm currently working on a series of shows, interviews with people in employment, but who are not working within the disability sector. So the first one of those came out in December last year, and that was a show talking to a legal practitioner. My next one is going to be an interview with South Africa's first blind tour guide. And then I have a wheelchair user who is a data analyst. And I've got a number of shows that I've lined up, either recorded, they're in the pipeline, or they are just ideas in my head at the moment. And I think part of that is because of the challenge we face in the employment space. And a lot of that, I think, is, well, certainly here in South Africa, I think there is less awareness of what job opportunities there can be for people who are blind, people who are wheelchair users, people with learning disabilities. So speaking to people and offering them more ideas of potential avenues for their career growth is something that I'm very passionate about as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is really, really excellent to, have a podcast that reaches out to people like that, and that you're speaking to people who are working, yet not who have a disability but are not necessarily working in the disability field, just working in mainstream field. And I think that's a
Yeah.
very specific and interesting distinction that, a lot of times in the United States, if someone with a disability does work, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they end up helping other people with disabilities or in some way, working in the disability field, which that's not the end of the world. That's not
No,
necessarily bad,
there's nothing wrong
except,
with that at all.
well, there actually is, but actually the thing that's wrong with that is that it reinforces the fact that people with disabilities, if they work, shouldn't work in the mainstream. That's the problem with that.
Yeah.
So that actually is a problem in the States. But I'd rather, of course, I'd rather see people working regardless, but I'd
Mm.
rather see people, certainly, definitely it would be better if people worked. Um, I don't want to use the word better, but it would be just as well, we would say, if people would work outside the disability, the disability field. Unless, of course, their line of work directly, applies to it, and then it's fine. But yeah.
I think it's we should just be aware of the potential opportunities
Hmm.
that are there. And if we're going into work within the disability sector because we see it is the only option for us, that is
Right.
problematic. But if we choose to do it because it's our passion, it's our love, because we want to empower other people, I don't really see that as a problem in itself. But as you say, alongside that is perhaps the thing that is more of a problem, and that is that there is less inclusion or fewer inclusion opportunities available in mainstream employment because there seems to be this myth, this stereotype that says that, oh, if you are disabled, you know disability, therefore work in disability. And that is held probably even more strongly in the non-disabled community. And that's when it becomes the problem.
Precisely. That's exactly what the problem is. Yeah. Yeah. But now, of course, getting people who are not disabled to understand that problem, that's the other thing that I'm sure you have found it as well, is that it's easy for us to talk about this topic because we understand. But what is
Mm-hmm.
harder is explaining it to someone who has no experience with it and still helping them to understand it in the right way. That's where it's difficult. And that's where
Yeah.
I find that podcasting can really shine a light because we can provide knowledge over a period of time that would hopefully be able to help people slowly but surely. Keyword, I said slowly. You know, people these days, everybody is kind of going at their own pace in life, and that's fine. But what I'm really saying is that it takes a long time to undo damage, you know. And I tell people, in my teaching work that I do, I tell students, this is why you have to get these choices right now. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
I tell people, please don't make that mistake. And then they say, but why not? I say, because it's really hard to repair the damage after you make the mistake. It's just easier if you don't make the mistake. This is the problem. Undoing damage is very difficult. And we're
Yeah.
seeing it now in the States. And I'm sure you see it there in South Africa. From the pandemic forward, we have the disability community, just like all other communities, have suffered immensely, just as everyone else did during the pandemic. But it really affected people in the blindness community, especially people who were not working at all, didn't really have any social connections, things like that, you know. Yeah. Have you studied, society and how people are socially interacting these days? We have a lot of apps for that. We have Discord and where we have a server here on Aaron's Opinion for Discord. I'm in a major Discord server for blind people around the world, and Discord's good. What's your perception of this relatively new concept of Discord and these social media apps in that way? What do you think?
I'm not personally um, familiar with Discord. I hear it coming up regularly. I have enough problems staying abreast of my own stuff and without exploring too many new technologies. I do that quite slowly. I think it is one of the things that I'd love to improve and become more forward thinking about embracing new technologies like Discord. But I think, well, let me share a story with you that is not disability related as well, but I think the parallels are quite clear. A friend of mine was traveling in a car with his daughter and one of her close friends, and they were totally silent in the car, and they were constantly busy on their phones. And he said to them, why why aren't you talking? Why don't you put down the phones and just have a conversation? And they said, the problem is we are actually three very close friends. Two of us are here and one is not. We don't want to exclude our other friend who is not with us. So we are talking using technology. And I think for me, what I've found is that the technologies that we have available to us nowadays are opening up so many ways that we can connect. We can connect globally, we can connect locally, we can connect with people anytime, any way that we choose. And that is such a powerful and amazing opportunity. I wouldn't be able to coach clients in the USA if not for techniques and tools like Zoom. I would not be able to work as on a core admin team of a group of global women speakers if we didn't have the ability to reach out and run meetings once a month where we're all able to connect at the same time, share our knowledge, share our experience. So I think any tools that we have are really fantastic. Where I get a bit overwhelmed sometimes is just by the sheer number of technologies that we have that are available to us. And I think that can be a little bit overwhelming because different things work for different people. In some ways, I kind of wish we had only one or two technologies that could do everything. I know that's not practical, and I know that that's just not the way that businesses run, but it would at least make it a little bit simpler, particularly when we're talking of bringing the accessibility of these platforms in as well. But I love the variety, the opportunities that we're given through the technologies that are available to us. I think back to when I first became blind and how limited my ability to reach out was, particularly in a country that had almost zero public transport, that was a very car based and motor vehicle based society, that things were it was very hard to get around just using initially a white cane and then my guide dogs. So I love the fact that I can reach out to people. I love the fact that I can talk to you today with you being in the USA and me being in Cape Town. It's just
Right.
awesome that we have that ability.
Absolutely. I think the story that you told, um, with the story you told with these people in the car and they wanted to have a three-way conversation. I mean, I actually give them credit. The fact that they knew that they should try to include a friend. Well, okay, give them give them credit where credit's due. At least
Yeah,
they wanted to include, so like that's actually kind of in the right direction, you know.
yeah,
So I mean, I kind of do get it. And unfortunately, with people living in all these other countries, it's understandable. But basically, Discord is like just another very similar to it's kind of a blend between Zoom-ish, WhatsApp-ish,
hmm,
Facebook-ish. It's kind of a blend.
okay,
And you create servers, you create communities, you create rooms, and then you create voice channels where people can like have conversations, and then you just join the voice call. It's good for having group meetings and group conversations
yeah,
and finding people. It's very straightforward to use once you get the hang of it. But there is a particular international group that's very good in there for blind people. So
yeah,
yeah, but it's extremely interesting now that we're able to have these conversations and make the connections that we can. That's super important. Yeah. So as far as your now, I mean, as far as your writing goes, it sounds like you've written several books. Why don't you dig into some of your creative writing and some of your writing projects that you've endeavored on?
well, I actually fell into writing totally by accident. And I suppose I should just give an overview first. I've 6 published books, one of which was a bestseller on Amazon. Those 6 are my first 4 books that I brought out were illustrated children's books about a blind mouse named Missy Mouse. And those were originally aimed more at a sighted audience than a visually impaired or blind audience, but I have at least taken steps to make them accessible. My next book was the bestseller, the Amazon bestseller. That's A Different Way of Seeing. And it's it's kind of a memoir, but more than that, it's a story talking about the tools and techniques that I use to accomplish tasks. And then my 6th book is a memoir from the perspective of my guide dog Fiji, and that's called Pause for
Oh
Thought,
boy. Yeah.
Seeing the World Through the Eyes of a Guide Dog. And I say I fell into writing by accident
Hmm.
because the children's books were written way, way back when I first became blind and I was learning to use a computer. I was learning to use a screen reader. And my computer teacher said to me the best way to become comfortable using a screen reader is just to use it. So transcribe work, create work, do whatever you want, but spend time on your computer, listening to the screen reader, working with your software, with the apps on your computer, and just it's got to become second nature. And I didn't want to transcribe other people's work, but I've always been a songwriter, I've been a poet, I've been creative in that sense. And amongst the things that I started creating were 4 stories about this blind mouse, Missy Mouse. And looking back at them now, I can realize that I was using those stories to help me process my experience of becoming blind, learning the tools and techniques that were open to me, and to bring those into my own consciousness. I did nothing with those stories for ages and ages. And in fact, when I was doing my coaching qualifications, I was sitting at supper with another coaching student, and she jokingly said to me, "Oh, you tell such great stories. You should write a book." And I said, "Well, I have 4 little children's books." And the that conversation resulted in her introducing me to the illustrator, who's a woman by the name of Colleen Gomez, who's also a Cape Townian. And we did the illustrations. That was a story in itself about how to make those illustrations accessible to me, which Colleen was really creative about doing. And we then published them. But I knew nothing about publishing. I knew nothing about marketing. I was a complete newbie when it came to the publishing industry. The next book, Different Way of Seeing, came out of the work that I started doing as a professional speaker, starting to use my voice from stages to talk about blindness, to talk about disability, to talk about accessibility. And one of my coaching mentors there, or my speaking mentors, said to me, the problem is people are sitting in the audience going, but how? You tell us that you do all these things, but we don't know how you would do that. How would a blind person use a computer? How would she apply her makeup? How would they select their clothing? How would they do it? And those questions bouncing around in my audience's mind stopped them from actually hearing the message that I was sharing. And she said, "You should talk about that." And I put it out on Facebook and said, I just thought, well, come on, surely people couldn't care how I do things. Isn't it more important that I can do them? And I put it out on Facebook, as we all tend to do these days. And the responses I got from my then largely sighted community were, we do want to know. We want to know all of these different things. We want to know how you tell the time, how your guide dog works, how you navigate the world using a white cane. We want to know how you select your clothing, how you go shopping, how you cook. And that was when I realized that how I do things, them not understanding that, was a barrier in itself. So that's really what formed the basis of a different way of seeing, and my fundamental belief that that whole thing that I said earlier, that the only thing different about me is the way, it's the tools and techniques I use. It's just a different way of seeing. And then, so that became the next book. And I had learned a huge amount more about the publishing industry before I launched that one. And that was then originally launched in 2016, relaunched in 2020. And that was when it became a bestseller, once I'd learned better how to launch and market the book. And then from there, I had been blogging in my guide dog's voice since I got her in 2016. She did a monthly blog for my blog site. And I thought, let me collect those blog posts together and put them into a story. So it's talking about the way I think that Fiji viewed the world. Things that we as human beings see one way, but to a dog might appear totally different. And that can be anything from queuing in shops to traveling on an airplane or on a train, or, well, COVID provided so many story opportunities. Imagine social distancing from the perspective of a dog. imagine, I mean, that whole thing of queuing. Dogs, that's not something that they do. So it's looking at the way it's just taking a different perspective, a step back from the things that we take for granted as human beings, and maybe seeing them again just a little bit differently. It was so much fun to write from Fiji's perspective. There's a lot of humor. In fact, in all of my books, there's a lot of humor. I I do sometimes have a slightly unusual sense of humor, and writing in Fiji's voice gave me the opportunity really to play with that. And I'm actually currently going through the process of, with my dog having passed away towards the end of last year, I'm going through the process now of taking the subsequent blog posts and adding them into the book, adding more content of things that developed after 2020, which is when I kind of finished the manuscript, and updating the book. And then I'll be relaunching it sometime early this year. Well, probably, if I'm honest, more towards the middle of this year, because I've got quite a few things on the go at the moment. So, but that is something that I'll be doing.
Absolutely. That's so meaningful to me that you would write something in Fiji's voice. As we talked about,
Mhm.
I was a guide dog user. I had a guide dog from Guiding Eyes for the Blind, yeah, in New York, Nani. And she was around with me she was around from 2007 until the height of the pandemic in 2020.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really fascinating, all those cute and endearing and fascinating experiences. Nani, just like Fiji, she went all over the world with me. She
Mhm.
touched a lot of souls and helped a lot of people. Well, never mind about me. Guide dogs are a huge sense of calm and peace to a lot
Yeah.
of people around the world. I think it really, when a guide dog is trained well and trained professionally and behaving well, I think it really can show the right side of the spectrum of having a disability and being successful. I think it really can send the right idea, in some regards. But that's very, very, very touching and very sweet. So now in South Africa, I would not imagine that there would be many guide dogs there. So how did you come across a guide dog school in South Africa? Like, talk about that experience.
There's one guide dog training organization that I know of. That's the South African Guide Dogs Association for the Blind. They have offices in several cities in South Africa, and they have two training centers, one in Johannesburg and one in Cape Town. And I've always loved dogs. I've always grown up with dogs. They've always been part of the family. Um, but I didn't really ever consider getting a guide dog. And then through meeting someone who had a guide dog, I saw how much independence that Mandy gave to him. Mandy was his guide dog. And Paul, Mandy's human partner, said to me, try, take the experience. Here's the harness. Let's just walk up the road and back and see what that experience is like for you. And that was when I fell totally in love with the concept of guide dogs, with the independence that, I mean, I am not by any means saying that a guide dog is better than a white cane as a mobility tool. They are both incredibly powerful tools used in the right ways. But for me, I love the ease of having a dog. And I've had three dogs so far. I'm just in the process, actually, of adding my name back to the list. I had really spent a lot of time since Fiji passed away thinking about, was it right for me to get another dog? Was my grief over losing her? And I actually took the decision this past weekend that yes, now is time. And I know there is a waiting list as well. So I don't know what doesn't necessarily mean I'll get a dog soon, but at least I'll have the opportunity to. But yeah, I think I love the ease of a guide dog, avoiding obstacles. I taught myself a route that I've been doing with my guide dogs for probably 24 years. And I did it for the first time with a white cane a few weeks ago. I couldn't believe how many obstacles there were on that route that I had never even been aware of because the guide dog just navigates around them. And I I used to think, oh, it's an easy route, easy walk. Wow, she's not actually doing very much work until I did that with a white cane. Now, granted, my white cane skills are not particularly good. That's my own reality. I've never focused on the skills like I should have, and it is something I would like to improve. But just the difference in the experience of doing that route with my dogs and then with a white cane was absolute. It was a very rude awakening of exactly how poor my cane skills are. So yeah, I think they do. They are, and of course, people love dogs. They're a great way of opening conversations. I use my dog becomes an assistant to me when I'm up on stage speaking. Um, they really serve such a powerful role in terms of making connections, breaking down barriers, and yeah, um, so it's one of the things that that's part of the life, isn't it? Part of the experience, part of the
It
choices we
is.
make. Of yeah.
It is, Steph, without doubt, without doubt. Absolutely, absolutely. So Lois, believe it or not, we have about 10 minutes left. I also want to tell you, Lois, I'm not sure if you saw, but we actually have a bit of an audience today. We have at least one person who's been with us the whole time, and then one of our other great South African friends is repeatedly trying to join the meeting, and I don't know what's wrong with his internet. He's his internet sometimes goes in and out, as you know. So he's been
Yeah.
trying to join and coming in and coming out. But I do
Yeah.
want to, if you wouldn't mind, in a moment, I actually would like to give. There's this one particular person in the audience, sitting in the audience, who probably has a question. But before I get to that, I want you to ask me some of your questions that you really want to know about Aaron Richmond and Aaron's opinion. So I'm sure, given these past couple months of us trying to get this interview done and then the obstacles that both of us face, I'm sure you know that you are not getting out of here by just saying, I don't know. So you're going to have to come up with a question. So, what do you really want to know about Aaron Richmond and Aaron's opinion? And I mean, when I say really make me sweat, I mean it. Really make me sweat to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster.
Well, I think the very first question that I'll ask is when you're going to be a guest on my show.
Well, as soon as possible, or whenever you would like to give me that privilege, I would love to be interviewed by you. You are obviously a very there he goes again. What is with his internet today? You are welcome to interview me anytime, and I would love that. It's even more fun to be the guest than it is to be the host. Absolutely. So
I think
yeah.
it's a very different experience, and maybe that's an interesting question for you to kind of share your thoughts on is what do you think the main difference is between being the host of a podcast and a guest?
Well, I think the difference for me, at least, is that if I'm the host, I really speak my mind. As you can tell, I have a lot of really strong opinions, but then there are other times where I have to hold back a little bit as a host, you know.
Mhm.
But if I'm a guest, I say whatever pops into my head. I don't filter if I'm the guest. I only filter if I'm the host. So, you're getting, you would get two different sides of my dynamic personality, my unusual and dynamic character for sure. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
if you had to focus on one particular area
Mm-hmm.
to talk about as a
Mm-hmm.
guest,
Mm-hmm.
or let's say three main topics, what would those topics be?
Well, my love for podcasting, my love for creating audio for you and for other people around the world. That's something that just makes me happy. Earlier today, you mentioned how you saw that when you were writing your children's book, you saw that that was really therapeutic for you. I feel
Mhm.
that podcasting is really therapeutic for you and for me and for the world. I feel better when I record episodes. I feel better when I talk to people. So that whole notion of the therapy of podcasts, the therapy of conversation, how it truly is in my greatest opinion truly mutually beneficial for both of us. So I mean that's an area, and then of course my other interests in political stuff that's going on around the world. I'm also fascinated by languages. I'm also a French speaker, so I love talking about education and language acquisition and things like that. And then just other things that are just going on around the community, other strange stories, other silly stories. I love to tell jokes and I love to tell about hilarious things that happen in life and things like that, because there's been a lot of that type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I suppose the question is, how many questions can I ask you now before you say, well, it's time to check in with the people who are tuning into the show? Because that's the other part of being a podcast host is that there are constantly questions, aren't there?
There are. Absolutely. Well, let's see something here. Let me see if the person who is our South African friend seemingly just is not having luck with internet today. Don't worry. You'll meet him soon. You'll meet him in a few minutes anyway. But this guy over here, let's see something here. Let me see if whoa. No, not that. Um, okay, no, 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 no. Let's see here. Well, let's try to get him in. And then let's go over here to, okay, yeah, exactly. Okay, so Jason, we're going to actually unmute you. Thank you for joining, and let me unmute him and see if he wants to come in and ask a question. So let's give this a try. All right. It takes the system a minute, as you know, to unmute him. His name is Jason, and apparently he luckily has a question for us. And we're actually going to, okay. And then the other person here that we're going to let ask the question for sure is this person. Okay, or not. His audio is not working. Okay. Anyway, we will hope that Jason has a question. Jason, you should be unmuted if you want to ask something or if you want to type, and also Latavo as well. I'm sure you have a question, so either one of you can type. That would be good. So let's give those two guys let's give them another minute to see if they type a question or if either one of them speaks up. So yeah, so do you have a final question that you really want to ask me?
Hmm. Possibly the same question that you asked me, and that is about how you got started in podcasting.
Sure, sure. Well, um during the height during the pandemic, I've been podcasting since 2020. And so during the pandemic, I was still doing a lot of teaching at that point. And I was, realizing that there's a lot of blindness related podcasts around the community, but they just weren't really open to my opinions. And I had a real problem with that. So I wanted to create an environment where people can come up to the microphone and talk and have a conversation. Um, and what I would do is I would actually go on Facebook and find various questions that people were asking. And then these questions I would actually record answers to. Someone would ask, should I get a guide dog? And I would say, hi, dear so and so. Today you want to know, should I get a guide dog? And then I would talk
Mhm.
to them just in a private message. And then those messages and those audio files just became a podcast over a period of time. And that's how I got into this. Yeah. Hmm.
That's a great story.
It's true. That's how. It's not a story.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. And
Stories can be true. Stories
yeah.
aren't always, when we're not saying that stories are
Right.
nonfiction. Narrative is whatever we choose to make it. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. All
and
right.
they do say that fact is stranger than fiction. So,
Well, usually, except
yeah.
except in Aaron Richmond's life, where some of the fiction is some of the fiction is stranger than the facts. So that one teeters in both directions. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. All right, everybody. Well, we're gonna say click the link in the description to learn more. Lois Strachan, you are forever part of the Aaron's Opinion family. You are so welcome here on this podcast. I wish you all of the best and your continued success in what you're doing in podcasting and blogging and just so much great stuff. Just just keep on keeping on, and we really appreciate you here over in the States and around the world. So thank you for taking the time to join us today, and thank you for your patience in getting to connect with us, but we really, really appreciate it. And in just a few moments, I do hope you have WhatsApp because you will be added to my private WhatsApp community for all the guests, where you'll be able to talk to Latabo, the person who kept on getting disconnected. But I'm sure he probably has heard of you because he's also from South Africa. But I don't know, but maybe.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat to you. And yeah, it's taken us 4 months to actually sit down and chat like this, but it's been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Well worth the wait. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And if I can just tell anyone who's listening to this, if they do want to find out more about me and my work, my podcast, my books, my music, any of that, hop onto my website on loisstrachan.com.
That's right, and click the link in the description for more information. All right then. So Lois, do you know? I also have to wonder one more thing. Have you listened to any of my episodes of Aaron's Opinion before?
I have. And I'm
Okay, good.
fascinated by the breadth of the conversations you have. So that's been a lot of fun for me to kind
Well,
of
that's
look through
one.
and
Well, that's
see what you're
wonderful.
doing.
Well, that's so
Yeah.
good. So then, of course, you know how we end an episode, right? You know what my slogan is, right? So why don't you go ahead and walk us out with my slogan? I always like to let guests do that as long as they know what the slogan is.
I wouldn't want to get it wrong and mangle it. So I think I
That's
should leave that in your
that's
very
fine.
capable,
That's
experienced
fine. So I
hands.
can so I can mangle it by saying thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. We'll be back soon. Take care, everyone. Stay safe out there and keep podcasting. Help one person today. Help 1 million people tomorrow. For those of you who are still surviving on YouTube, thanks so much for listening. All right, everybody. It's a great conversation with Lois Strachan. Click the link in the description for more. Like the video, comment below, tickle the bell notification to know when we go live next on YouTube. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel and share it with a friend. All right, then. We'll see you guys soon, and we'll be in touch, Lois. Take care, everybody. And as we say, have a great day, everyone. Stay safe out there, and we'll be back soon. And just keep podcasting and have a good day. All right, everybody.